Hello everybody and welcome to this video looking at Gust JRPGs. This is a topic that I like talking about quite a bit because I am one of the biggest fans of Gust out there, and I wanted to talk today about what it is about Gust games in particular that I enjoy so much, because one of the things about Gust is it's a very prolific game developer for a start. So in just the last couple of years it has released 2 Atelier games, a Knights of Azure game, and Blue Reflection, which is the one that you see on the screen in front of you right now. It releases a lot of games, especially for a very small studio. It's not a big studio by any means. It just really churns them out, and while you can say churns them out in quite a negative context, when it comes to Gust, they always manage to keep enough vibrancy, creativity, originality to keep me really looking forward to each new one that comes out. And I do see them all as distinct games within whatever franchise they're created in. I see differences from one to the next. I know some other people might not, but Gust is a company that really caters to its niche first and foremost. I happen to be part of that niche, and so I'm inclined, having played an awful lot of them, I'm inclined to see the differences and see the subtle ways that the developers constantly rework and fine-tune and improve on their games and their structures and all of that. But one thing that is common across most Gust games, if not all Gust games, well, there's a couple of things that are quite common, and those things are what makes Gust unique. There are no other developers that really do what Gust does. There are some that come close, there are some that do some of these things, but what I'm going to talk to you about in the video today is all quite unique to Gust, and that's what makes it special to me, and that's why I really love the developer, and that's why I've called this video, why Gust is the best developer of JRPGs out there. Despite having very, very low budgets for their games, despite being very constrained by limited technology and limited numbers of limited staff size and all that, they can't do what Square Enix does, for instance, and just throw money at a game until it's finished, as they did with Final Fantasy 15. They can't even do what Namco Bandai does with the Tales of series, because those do sell really substantially well over a longer period of time. Gust games tend to sell very well to their specific niche and then drop away quite quickly. So Gust games are very constrained projects, but what they do within their constraints and the common themes that they do and the way that they're able to continue to create their own identity as a developer, and you can always see what a Gust game is just by looking at it. You can always tell that it's not like other JRPGs out there, and it must therefore be a Gust game. All of those things is what I love about the series, and why for me it's a really special developer. So to address the most obvious element first up, Gust games are always led by female protagonists, and that's quite uncommon for JRPGs even today. A lot of JRPG franchises will experiment by giving a female character a lead role in one of the games in the series, or will still have a male lead but have a really strong female supporting cast, for example. Pretty much all JRPGs do that, but what Gust games do is make the women very much the focus of the entire experience. And this is most obvious in Blue Reflection, because it's set at a school which is an all-girls school, and there is never a male in sight throughout the entire game. You never see a male character. It's always women or girls talking to one another. They might be talking about boys, for example, so there's kind of references to male characters, but there's no actual male characters in the game. It's very much a girl's story about a kind of coming of age for an entire class of girls, and that is the tone of the game, and having a male character in there would disrupt that tone, because it suddenly brings other elements into the mix, the interaction between boys and girls, and that would disrupt the kind of the coming of age story, which is that's definitely the focus of Blue Reflection, and that's why Blue Reflection is such a interesting game. And that applies to pretty much all of the Gust franchises. So Atelier, which is the long-running one that's been around for a very long time, has very, very rarely had a male lead character. And even when it has had a male lead character, it's been a male working with a female character. So Atelier Eska and Logi, for example. One of the characters is male, one of the characters is female. But that's very uncommon. Pretty much all of the Atelier games are either led by a single female character or a couple of female characters. The most recent one, Atelier Lodi and Sul, has the two sisters working together. And again, it's really uncommon to have an entire franchise constantly being led by female characters. To the point, Atelier games have male characters in them, and they'll join your party, and they'll have a pretty important role to play in battle and the evolving storyline. But those male characters, at the same time, tend to be very backgrounded and tend to be very submissive to what the female characters want, and often as not, the kind of comic relief characters as well. They tend to be the really silly ones and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, Atelier is a very strongly female-led series as well. And then you look at Knights of Azure, and that's quite obviously always about the female characters once again. So that's a common thread across the Gust game. If you see a Gust game on the shelf, you know almost entirely, 100% of the time, it's going to be a game that's led by a female character. But what about some of the other themes? I mean, one of the other great things that I love about Gust games is the relatively light or relatively lack of focus on antagonistic conflict. And by that I mean, if you pick up your typical JRPG, it's about a quest to go and defeat a bad guy of some description, a monster, a great evil, an empire if it's Final Fantasy, for example. But you look at the Atelier games, and for example, and there's not really an antagonist. There's conflict in the sense that you have challenges to overcome, but they're usually around becoming a better alchemist and improving yourself and becoming a better part of your community and more useful to your community and all of that kind of thing. The combat that's in the game, and you've seen some combat there on the screen in front of you, the combat is actually in the game, but it's not the focus of the story, and it's more a means to an end, and it's not aggressive about the combat either. It's very light in terms of its interest in having you fight stuff. So that's a really big thing about this game, and that it sounds like it's a minor shift, but not having a big bad guy at the end of the experience, at the end of the adventure, frees the storytellers up to be much lighter and much more pleasant and much more comfortable. And that's the best way to describe an Atelier game. It's very comfortable to watch. You sit back and you just enjoy it. You let it wash over you. You just enjoy the humor, the innocence, the purity of the game, and the sense of it's so charming. And whenever I play an Atelier game, I have a big smile on my face, and it kind of stays there the entire game, because it's just so pleasant. And it's so rare to have a game that's just pleasant to play. And that's definitely a big part of a bulk of Gust's games, because Blue Reflection is similar. It has a greater sense of combat to it, but at the same time, it is, once again, it's a coming-of-age story, and it's the focus of the individual plot points are always about the interactions between the characters and their relationships as they grow and improve and all of that kind of stuff. Knights of Azure is a much more traditional game in that it is an action RPG and quite combat heavy, but again, even with that, there's this great sense of sentimentality about the game and about the experience and about the way that the characters interact with one another. And it's you could almost say it's naive, but it's also pure. Again, even amongst all the kind of the bloodletting that happens in Knights of Azure, there's that pure kind of relationship dynamic at the core of the game. And it's not something you can just lift out and point at and say, hey, look, this is what I'm talking about. This is what a Gust game is. It's more the kind of the overarching theme of how Gust goes about its game development. And I feel like that is because the developer is very interested still in weaving stories, not driving players from one moment to the next, as is in the case with a lot of games. A lot of games use cutscenes to push you into the next world or the next battle or the next, the next scene, or push you to the next objective, for example. But Gust games don't do that. They feel a little more aimless. They feel a little more open. Not that they are open games, but they feel more open in design, and they feel more directionless, and that does put a lot of people off these games. I've got to say, there are a lot of people that don't get the kind of the unique pacing and the lack of direction and the lack of focus that Gust games have on putting you into those next combat scenarios, or putting you onto the trail of the next bad guy or whatever. It doesn't resonate with everybody, but it does for me, and I think part of the reason is I play so many JRPGs, I review so many games, that I just get overwhelmed by the amount of similarities that are between them. And they look different, they play different, they're by completely different developers, but the same core foundational movement through a game is the same from so many games, and so many JRPGs in particular. Doesn't matter if it's Persona or Final Fantasy or whatever, they have that same beat and rhythm to them. But Gust games work to a very different rhythm, and it's their own rhythm, and it's something special. And it's I only discovered Gust games with the PlayStation 3, my first Atelier Rorona. That was my first Atelier game, and ever since then I have just absorbed each of these games because they're precious to me. And that's about all I've got to say, really. They're sweet, they're precious, it's smart, and they do a great deal of they're really impressive despite the budget they're on. So thanks very much for watching this video, and we will see you at the next one.